Stanley Hauerwas is a New Testament professor at Duke University in their theological seminary. He's a very reputable Bible scholar, but he's got some controversial opinions. Namely, he says it should be the chief task of theologians and pastors all over the world to get the Bible out of the hands of their people. Why? Because most people don't know how to read the Bible. They don't know what they're doing, and so they misuse the text and they twist it because they haven't done any homework and they can't read it. Well, I happen to disagree quite strongly with Stanley Hauerwas. Sorry, Stanley, you're much smarter than I am, I know. I actually think we need to get more people more heavily invested in their own Bible. I think the Bible is an incredibly rich and varied document, so that even the most foolish person can understand a lot of it right away just by reading the words off the page. But the more you dig into Scripture, the more you delve and mine it for greater worth, the more you come away changed and transformed through your greater interaction with the text. So to that end, what I've tried to do here is put together just a quick video helping you get started in how to study the Bible. And I want to make it clear that the Bible takes some work to get the most out of it. But if you're not really reading the Bible and this all seems a little bit intimidating to you and it kind of puts you off it, look, just read it. I mean, at the worst, be like a bull in a china shop. Soak it up. Read the gospel stories of Jesus. Read the little words in red and start there, because you're going to get 9/10 of it right away. But that other 10% takes a little bit of work. So let's talk about it. Well, first of all, we need to understand that when we're trying to correctly interpret Scripture, the number one rule is that context is king. You have to know who was talking, what they were talking about, what the occasion was for why they were writing stuff down, who was going to get it when they were finished writing it, and what they were going to understand from it. It's all about context. The Bible spans several thousand years in its authorship. It's got 66 different books with 100 different genres written by almost 1,000 different people. And they all come together to put together this encyclopedia, this compendium. It's the story of God's interactions with the world, and we need to do a little bit of work to know exactly who's talking when and how to understand it. So with that in mind, let me just remind you that everything that we're going to talk about can be summed up in this one word, context. And so we're going to ask 4 big questions of any biblical text that we look at. We're going to ask, who was the author? What did they mean when they wrote the text? Then, who got the text? And what did they get when they read it? So we want to know the author, the intent of the author, the occasion, the audience, and their understanding. Once we know who wrote it, what he meant, who got it, what they got, then we can ask ourselves kind of the big question is, what am I supposed to get out of this now, 2,100 years or 3,000 years later, in a totally different world, in a totally different context? Now, to help us determine what that context is like, we need some Bible study tools. First off, you just need a Bible. If you don't have a ton of money and you don't want to drop a ton of money, I suggest you get a little Bible. You can get a portable little Bible like this. I use this one all the time when I travel. It's got all my old Post-it notes in it. It's got all my love letters from my wife and stuff. It's like a little journal or a diary or something. And this one was like $10 at a bookstore. It's an NIV translation. If you only have money for one Bible and you're a fairly good reader, then the NIV is the way to go for you. If you're a little intimidated by some of the language in the Bible, then I suggest getting a Message translation. My Message Bible is the other Bible I use all the time. It's literally falling apart. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with these halves. But it's just demonstrative of the fact that I love my Bible. I read it all the time, and I try and ingest it. So get a Message Bible. That'll help you. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper, the best thing you can do is you can read as many different translations of the Bible as possible. So, for example, if you're going to study the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 5, sort of Jesus' coming out moment where he makes his first big speech, his first big sermon, get 10 different translations of the Bible in English and read them all together. Why? Well, because the Bible wasn't written in English. It was written in Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. Now, if you're a total dork, like me, and like people who are way more dorky and way more smart than me, you can get a Greek New Testament or a Hebrew Second or First Testament, and you can study things like that. Now, for me, I'm not great at Greek, so I sit there and I make little notes all the time, all over my Bible, and say this word means this and that, etc. If you're intimidated by that, you might want to get what's called an interlinear book or interlinear New Testament or First Testament. It looks like this. It's got the Greek on one side and the English on the other, or Greek on top and English on the bottom. That's a great way to study the Bible because you get the best manuscripts to figure out the most accurate rendering of the text possible, and then you realize that there's some translation issues there, and some things are parsed or said differently in Greek than they would be in English. Anyway, that's why we want you to read from a bunch of different translations, because all the translations get it like 99% right. And so you want to make up that 1% difference by reading a bunch of them and getting the gist of what's happening. That's going to give you the actual text. To find out things like authorship, you're going to need some other tools. Now, there's all kinds of helps and things like that that you can get. Big Bible encyclopedias, big Bible dictionaries, but one of the best purchases you can make is a study Bible. These come in all kinds of different translations. I like this one. It's called the Thompson Chain Reference Bible. They're a bit expensive, probably about $50. But every time you see a verse in the Bible, it'll have other parallel verses written right beside it, so you know where else you might look for ideas, for example, on salvation, joy, prayer, etc. It'll tell you all the other places you should look. And in the back of this Bible, it's got a bunch of notes and outlines, maps, etc. that'll help you understand things about authorship, intent, occasion, audience, etc. And you want to read up on those things so that you know what's happening. You can also get other things like dictionaries of biblical imagery that'll help you understand specific words. You can get Bible dictionaries. I suggest everybody who wants to really study this gets a book like this. This is the New Manners and Customs of Bible Times by Ralph Glauer. So you can find out, for example, all about what they did with donkeys and camels in first century Palestine, so that when a story about a donkey or a camel shows up, you get what it means. The text is enriched. You might also want to get something like this, which gives you charts and timelines and illustrations. If all that sounds dizzying to you, most of the stuff that you need to know about who the author was and who the audience was and what the point was and what they got was can be found really simply online. I suggest you use the internet, and there's a couple of websites that make things really simple. Number one, I use a thing called crosswalk.com, and it's got Greek and Hebrew resources, it's got Bible dictionaries, it's got everything you need. But just like with Bible translations, you don't want to rely on just one source. So that's the first source that you should use, but it's not the only one. I use Wikipedia a lot. Now, I know my Bible real well. I've done a lot of homework, so I know there's some concerns about whether or not Wikipedia is really trustworthy. I know enough that when I read something funny, I know it's goofy and that somebody's just being funny on Wikipedia. For example, I know that George W. Bush didn't write Deuteronomy. So when I see that, I know somebody's hacked into Wikipedia again. But really, I've only ever hit one or two snags in a dozen years of using the internet to study the Bible. So Wikipedia is fairly trustworthy for biblical research. Apparently hackers really just don't care about who wrote the Pentateuch. Okay? You can also use things like the JewishEncyclopedia.com or the CatholicEncyclopedia.com, and they've got a lot of great resources too. And there's a downloadable program called eSword, e-sword.net, that's great for a Windows user, and you can get everything you need, and pretty good for Mac users too, although it works a little differently for Mac. Now finally, when you get into specific books of the Bible and you want to find out specific information, the best thing you can do is invest in this little book right here by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart called How to Read the Bible Book by Book. And they go through literally every single book of the Bible and answer all the major contextual questions like who wrote it, why, when, for what purpose, who heard it, what did they get out of it, and they even go into and say, here's some things that you and I can pull out of this. It's a really great book. It's like $10. It's awesome. And they also wrote a book called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by the same two guys. That's just an excellent book that really, if you were only going to buy 2 books to help you study Scripture, those are the 2 you should buy. If you want to go deeper into the New Testament, then Tom Wright has a little series of books called, Hebrews for Everyone, Matthew for everyone, Mark for everyone, etc. And he goes through and does a fantastic job of exegeting or interpreting every section of every book in the New Testament. And he's one of our best New Testament scholars in the world today. And he's fantastic. And those books are real cheap. So if you're going to do a book of the Bible study or something like that, I suggest you get those. Okay? Those are the big questions. Who wrote it? When? Why? Who got it? What did they get out of it? And then lastly, we want to ask the question, what am I supposed to get out of it? Now, that's a question for another day, but thanks very much for listening, and hopefully that'll help you get started.